Okay, back in early spring, out to the wind. Jeff Prince, retired state range con, still working. He's been with me on a lot of this for about 40 years. This is my 41st year of cross fencing. And I'll probably include some things I didn't down there. We're forage production wise, we've increased roughly around 430% increase over our old production from old season long grazing. Things used to be pretty tough on this ground and in my other across the lake and to the north. We've increased, say, I don't so much numbers of livestock as, because I always sold pounds, I didn't sell head. It's pretty much sort of increased about 300%, and we like to leave more behind now than we used to raise total before. So if it's 430 to 300, that's 130%. I'm going to want to stress that we have to feed the soil first. We like to leave more behind than we used to raise total before. And then part of that, starting moving cattle to different pastures. What is minimum adequate rest recovery before you can safely come back and graze it again? To where the point where the roots have had a chance to reestablish themselves from initiating regrowth from grazing or initiating spring growth. And if they're clipped again before they've had a chance to put their money back in this piggy bank that had to borrow to grow, how much time does that grass need? And it gets to be a sort of an elusive chasing figure. The further I go, honestly, it seemed like the less I know.
Kyle needs you to turn this so that this isn't picking up wind.
Okay.
So he can get you on.
Will this be better if I turn?
I think maybe so. Try.
Okay. Okay, maybe I'll hold a hand this way.
It might help.
Okay. Is that better now?
Yep, he's saying it's okay.
Okay. Now I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Trish. But anyway, this here is sort of, Jeff called me and said maybe we should do something for this tour about monitoring regrowth and rest recovery, feeding the roots that they had to borrow from their piggy bank so they can replenish it and increase that bank account. So it started this May 15th. This is clipped once. I believe this has had 75 days rest. Then it came June 1st and did some clipping here. Each one is 2.5 inch and a 5-inch clipping. And it seemed like the break is about here. This was May 15th, June 1st. But it's not absolute that 15 days because we had very slow growth in those 15 days in the last half of May. We were at drought conditions, plus the third week in May we had temperatures in the low 20s and teens, down to 17, 22 degrees for 5 consecutive mornings. And I knew right then our production for the year out here in cool season grasses were cut in half. That's pretty much what happened. But it's been slow growth because of dry. Instead of 15 days here and then start initiating some growth, it probably was only be 3 days. It would have been really nice, ideal May. And then move the cattle, because when the plant starts initiating regrowth, they're going to come back to it and leave the coarse, woolly, woody stuff behind. It took me years to figure that out. I was at a salad bar at a buffet when I realized it. I want tender salad. I'm picking out the tender. That's a tender regrowth. I don't want the coarse, more mature stuff. And that's basically what the animals are doing. So the cross fencing is a tool to minimize overgrazing, giving those roots a chance to rest. And I picked the hilltop here. It's one of the poorer sites right down where Jeff and those four are standing right in behind him, and in here used to be mature capping and pussy toes. Hardly any forage. Actually, it's just mature capping. It would be next to nothing. And I could increase it further if I was more ambitious, and I'd be 30 years younger. I could do more intense now, but I don't want to. I'm not a mob grazer, moving every day or every other day. I know how to do it, and I've done it. but I like to enjoy a little bit of retirement. But I think this tells a story, and maybe Jeff and Mark Hayek and Stan Bowles, Kevin Sedevig, they're the three big gurus in the country here about soil health, grazing, grass health. But getting right in here, let's see, June 1st, June 15th, here's July 1st. And that shorter cutting, the 2.5 inch, it wasn't leaving much leaf. And I believe that's a really important part. And you get over in here, all of a sudden, neither one is good. And now we get into the fall, the cool seasons are going to start greening up some into August and September. And there's an old rancher rule of thumb. Be careful of and aware of grazing fall green up after summer brown, summer shortness. Because that growth is coming from energy borrowed from its roots. And that old rancher rule of thumb is be aware of and be careful of grazing fall green up after summer short brown with not much of any leaf left. Because you can potentially, by grazing that fall green up, get excited there's something out there to eat. You can potentially reduce next year's production by up to 50%. Looking at next year. Because it's continually borrowing from the roots and hasn't a chance to put it back in its piggy bank. I heard that saying years ago from Wayne Berry up by Williston, the shortgrass prairie into Montana. And I also heard it from an old rancher in the Sandhills in Nebraska on the big blue stem in the warm season country. So different areas of the country, they all had this old rancher rule. That's something we very seldom have ever heard anymore. And Kevin, would you have a minute to expound on that? No?
Your show.
Yeah, but you're a part of it. We've known each other for a couple of years. But
Hey, he's turning you down?
gosh, he turned me down for a date. You know. But I don't know what else to say on it. Right now, I'll give a little history, tidbits of history for the...
Make a little closer.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, you're upwind. I'll get back up here. I drifted down there. This was planned so the people talking would be sort of upwind. That looks like a island down there, but it's a peninsula sticking out into the lake. It's called Hangman's Point. In the late 1880s, there was a horse thief hung there. Posse took after him from Elbow Woods below Newtown and cornered him out here. And it's supposedly the last horse thief hanging in the state. Right there. They hung him on a cottonwood tree. And that's documented in a book called Recollections by old Dr. Robinson from Riverdale, an old vet from the late 80s, early 1900s. Another tidbit, can't quite see it over here, but too nice of a day you can't see the tower on it, the lights flashing, towards Butte, called Dog Den Butte. It's a high prominent butte in the area. It's a landmark. And Sitting Bull used to come out of there doing his raids onto the supply train wagons going from Fort Totten to Fort Union up south of Williston. And they had a resupply station right below by Strawberry Lake, about 6 miles north of here. And it's called Strawberry Lake. Got it named then because there's wild strawberries in the draws there. And there's remnants of that trail still in the neighbor's pasture about 3 miles northwest of here. Just tidbits of history of the area. So. This is Crooked Lake. It's about 5.5 miles long. It's sort of crooked. Then it hooks onto Long Lake and then Camp Lake, Strawberry Lake. And it's a part of the draw for it goes all the way down to the Missouri River and from Turtle Creek. Sort of give you a little background of the area. We have teepee rings and there's some rock burial sites around here. In some of the areas, get around in here every once in a while you'll see a rock with some has sort of grooves carved in it, old chippings. That's where they would tether their horses when they're out doing their summer gatherings, and the Native Americans. So it's sort of a supermarket out here if you know what to look for. Right here is the original source of Novocaine. But I won't say any more about plants. I could talk about that all day on the historic uses. Thanks to old Chris Hansen. But any questions?
When I was here on Wednesday, we talked about you found fall grazing on green up can be detrimental. Could you explain?
Fall grazing can potentially be detrimental. Yes. If it's a fall green up, even just like in the spring, it's recommended guideline 3.5 leaf stage in the spring before it safely can be grazed. If it needs that chance to put back in his bank, would have had to borrow to start growing. Be the same thing in the fall, unless it's had a lot of 60, 75 days rest recovery. But if it's every time it's had a little growth or regrowth, even just elongating, and if more than 50%, more than 40%, technically more than 42% of the leaf is taken off, the plant is sort of starting to shut down. It needs that leaf because that's a solar panel harvesting energy from the sun. And that fall green up, has to borrow from its bank the principal to initiate growth, and if that's grazed down, it doesn't have a chance to translocate back into its roots. But the animal has to be somewhere every day of the year, and that's where planned rest recovery, where they are, when, and for how long. There's a lot of art in it, and sometimes we say oops, and sometimes I've learned in the past, there's one more day left, I can keep him here one more day. You come back a day later and you wonder what the heck happened. There's a huge disappearance that last day. You see that too, Jerry? And then you have to lengthen the rest recovery time.
Yeah, I got a couple questions and like to hear from Jeff or Kevin about this. It's the differences in growth since you clipped is obvious, but looking at here, I also see a difference in forbs, and this isn't obvious to me in my experience. A typical or normal cool season grass site, but there should be some warm seasons here too. And why aren't we seeing any like blue grama or side oats grama or one of those other favored warm season grazing species?
Why we're not seeing more warm season? Right in here, just right on the hill over there, used to be 80, 100 years ago was 12 months of the year sheep. And it took a lot of diversity out, I'm guessing. And then the next person before, I'm the third person here from homesteading. The next person was 12 months of the year livestock grazing. But just up north here, this was just strictly his haying the bottom land and then late fall grazing. So it's a good question why there isn't more. I can't answer that exactly, but
In my experience, the land use history is really critical.
yeah. There is some warm season, but this is the fourth year of about 60% average annual precip, fourth consecutive year, and that really suppresses things. And the prairie is so diverse. I mentioned earlier, manage diversity rather than for or against a specific species. I've learned I don't know how to manage for or against a specific species. So you just change the time and timing and let nature, when the conditions are right for that particular species to flourish. 1 or 2 or 3 years, 1 or 2 or 3, 10 of them flourish. And then all of a sudden you don't see them. A big blue stem right over in here, there is some. 2 or 3 years ago, it was solid big blue stem, and now there isn't much. They're suppressed because of drought, and especially that freezing temperatures in the third week in May.
Okay.
Really shut a lot of stuff down. And it's, in fact, if I can, right there, those leaves right there, that was freezing, not frost, it was freezing. And that was the main leaf that was there to begin with, and it just shuts it down. And that would be a part of it too for the warm seasons.
Yeah. Would those same comments that you just made about the lack of warm seasons be true of the missing little blue stem here?
There is little blue stem, yeah. Over in those side hills there's some over here. In fact, there's some right in here. I don't have that's a good point. I used to have just thick, nothing but little blue stem thickets, but it's more diverse now. They've thinned out others, even there's big blue stem with little blue stem. Other species start coming in with it. This hillside over right in here and down over there by that pole, and that hillside over in there used to be predominant 40, 50 years ago as solid winter snowberry, buckbrush. But when you change any one thing, it changes everything, and gradually composition shifts. And at one time in the early 90s, after the dry years of the 1980s, had a lot of fringe sagewort. And I was advised then by a predecessor to Kevin Sedevig that I should be spraying out here, get rid of it. And I didn't, because I identified fringe sagewort has maybe 4 to 7 year life, and if I change my management so I'm not encouraging new seedlings, it'll diminish on its own, but I won't eliminate it, and it's still there with a deeper root system to bring up nutrients from deeper that the grass roots aren't going down to. Things like that. And besides, I'm sort of frugal. Well, I don't want to spend money on that kind of stuff and work if I don't have to.
Would you want to talk about parasites here in the U.S.?
Okay. How are we doing on the time for this site here? 2 o'clock, okay. Rust recovery, we'll do it here. We have more introduced invasive smooth brome grass over in that one, but we can do that here, good point. Rust recovery. Here we clipped it was 75 days rest. Here is clipped, it was second clipping in 15 days. Here to the end that's 60 days rest recovery. That's part of the planning that sort of a holistic management also is called biological planning. And I know several in the crowd here probably sharper at it than I am. It's simply when the internal parasites, flies, we hear dung beetles. How long does that insect, when it's pooped out and then hatches out and comes back, crawls back up on a stem, waiting for the animal to come back and pick it up so it can repeat its life cycle through the animal system? How long does that's the most vulnerable part of that parasite's life, when it's hanging there in that plant waiting to be picked back up to complete another cycle. I prefer thinking 45 days minimum, but if it's 60 days, 90 days before they're back again, pretty much broke up that parasite cycle without chemicals. And that's where your marketing of your beef. Things like that, and then if the insects are there, the dung beetles, 3 days later, if that cow pie is still there, what's wrong? Why aren't the insects breaking it down? Things like that we start thinking. And if the old cow pies are there, here's some here, one right there, that's a tied up mineral. It should be back into the soil helping feed the forage. And part of management here, this one here, I grazed it light in June last year. Dane Bicey brought a guy through here a couple hours after I pulled the cattle out and put them in another one. He says, when are you going to graze this? I says, no, I'm grazing it light. I'm setting it up so it'll be at least 3/4 of the way back to maturity on this growth curve for later fall for a backup plan called, what do we call it, stockpile grazing. And I used it in October when the snowstorm hit. I brought the cattle in here off the cropland. And they were protected in here. I even hauled some bales in here. There were 6-foot snowbanks back here. And then they grazed it harder. So it's always a where do you go next? Things like that. It's continuous. But it's a lot more fun. And everything I feel I do this year is planning for next year. All the management this year is next year's production and the year after. My old season-long grazing days, I was at the mercy of the weather every week. And I went from 160 to 180 days of average grazing without, say 180 days of grazing without feeding hay. Went from that up to 220 to 270 days at times without feeding hay. And now I'm just a custom grazer. I don't have to calve them out, don't have to put up much hay, don't have to feed them, don't have corrals to clean. But when you're 74 years old, Jerry, you look for
Quality of life on them.
yeah. And I have good neighbors around me. So. Any other input on all this?
If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to jump in. You know,
Please do. We don't want it just one side. Yeah, Jeff reminded me when we first, some of these cow pies here, they came from late last fall when it was cold and snow. Yeah. But there was 80 some pairs in here in this 23 acres for 3 weeks last fall in October. So 83 plus 90 prairie bedroot.
I told Jerry I'd dig him up a turnip or something.
There you go. That's all he gets.
Was this a farmyard?
No, there was nothing here. No, we moved that cabin in, that house in. Had an uncle that was born in that house, but is about 15 miles away. Yeah. But no, no, this has not been grazed this year. The question was, has it been grazed this year yet? No. I'm just doing a quick, I don't remember exactly, but with a light, moderate grazed, flash grazing, some will call it, last year in the middle of June. And then that heavy grazing after that, during and after that snowstorm. I think I got about 2.5 AUMs an acre off of this where we're standing here last year. And the average recommended stocking rate here is 0.7. So does that?
Yeah. Okay.
And if it wouldn't have been for this tour and another tour scheduled 2 weeks from now, I would be sort of scheduled to bring him in tomorrow right here, but I'm going to wait 2 weeks. Flexibility. I'm not rigid, and I charge so much per head per day according to size and type. The bigger they are, the more they charge per hundredweight. And Ryan and I have discussed that, and I think it's a fair way for doing for everybody. But going by that, I said I can have 3 1,000-pound animals or 2 1,500-pounders. A 1,500-pounder of the same breed type, according to Texas A&M data, a 1,500-pounder has about 47% more nutritional needs than the 1,000-pounder. So it's roughly pretty close, parallel, 3 to 2, 3 1,000. So that's why I'm sort of hesitant when I start mentioning numbers of livestock. It can be so varied.